for being here, for bundling up and braving the frigid weather. In light of that weather, I want to give you an extra warm welcome tonight. My name is Catherine Geddick-Soltis. I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Center for Peace and Justice Education, which hosts its annual keynote address as part of Villanova University's commemoration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. There's already been a full capacity MLK Day of Service on Saturday. There was a beloved community student lunch on Monday. During this entire commemoration week, we strive to reflect on and expand the legacy of MLK, pursuing the justice which is the urgent responsibility of each and every one of us. I want to again recognize and sincerely thank the Villanova University Gospel Choir. You have stirred our hearts with such beauty and inspiration. What a tremendous way to begin our evening. And a special evening it will be. But before our formal introductions, I want to invite you to continue to become a part of the MLK commemoration activities tomorrow, Thursday, January 23rd. Here in the Connolly Center, in various rooms, we'll explore MLK's legacy with the annual Freedom School. Students, staff, and faculty will be offering a fantastic range of one-hour sessions throughout the day on topics including banned books, sustainability, dialogue, immigrant justice, conflict resolution, protest songs, and more. You can find the descriptions and times for all the sessions on our Freedom School webpage, so come and learn and discuss tomorrow. Tonight, for our keynote address, we are truly honored to be able to hear from one of our own, Dr. Teresa Nance, who will offer remarks under the title, "Now is the Time, Community Over Chaos." Dr. Nance will be properly introduced in just a moment by another remarkable member of the Villanova community, Dr. Crystal Lucky. Dr. Lucky is Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and a professor of English. She is also a pastor, a former director of the Africana Studies program, and herself a former speaker for Villanova's MLK Keynote address in January 2012. In fact, Dr. Lucky and Dr. Nance are the only speakers for this major annual event that have been members of our community. Because sometimes you don't need to go very far to find the wisdom you need. I want to express thanks to the many offices, programs, and people that joined with the Center for Peace and Justice Education to make this week's commemoration activities possible. I thank the members of our wise and generous MLK committee. I thank our extraordinary collaborators, including the Office of Belonging and Inclusion, the Center for Access, Success, and Achievement, the Office for Mission and Ministry, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Career Center. And finally, I thank two specific incredible people, Katie Linehan and Ray Ward, my colleagues in the Center for Peace and Justice Education, who've gone above and beyond to help make tonight and tomorrow's events possible. Thank you all. Following Dr. Nance's address this evening, there will be time for some Q&A, and after that, there will be more time for conversation and community. We'll have a reception right here in this room with some light refreshments so that we can continue to hear from and connect with one another. So please stay and enjoy. Finally, an important note about history. We had a significant anniversary here at Villanova 2 days ago on January 20th. Because exactly 60 years before that, on January 20th, 1965, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. spoke in the Villanova University Field House to an audience of over 4,000 students, faculty, staff, and local community members. He spoke about the ongoing struggle toward desegregation and the Civil Rights Act, which had been passed only 6 months before. Every year for our MLK Keynote address, we gather in the midst of ongoing struggle. But we also gather as a community that has been a literal witness to MLK's vision. As we mark this 60th anniversary of MLK's address at Villanova, I can't think of a better voice for our community than Dr. Teresa Nance. And so, with much gratitude, I turn this over to Dr. Crystal Lucky. Thank you.
Good evening. How do you introduce an icon? How do you adequately describe the contributions of someone whose good works are so germane to the feeling and ethos of a place that the place names a whole office after you? Namely the Dr. Teresa Nance Center for Dialogue. How do you introduce an icon? You do so with love and deep affection. Dr. Teresa A. Nance, a native of Cleveland, Ohio, has been an integral presence at Villanova for more than 45 years. During her tenure, she has served as a teacher, scholar, administrator, activist, and support system for Villanova's students, faculty, and staff. Her institutional knowledge, leadership, and insight have been invaluable to Villanova's diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts to help the institution become an even better version of itself. She arrived on campus in 1978, still working on her PhD in speech education at Temple University. And can I say that I've seen pictures of her from those years, and she still is, she was fine, okay? She became the first Black tenure-track faculty member in the Department of Communication. She later served the department as chair from 1998 to 2004 and established highly sought-after courses in African American rhetoric and multicultural leadership. Always a scholar and consistent contributor to her field, she is the author of numerous publications and scores of presentations investigating the perceptions and stages of interracial relationship development, diversity and inclusion, and intergroup dialogue. She has received several awards and recognition for her teaching. Most recently, in 2021, the National Communication Association Black Caucus awarded Dr. Nance the Lifetime Achievement Award. And in 2018, the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education recognized Dr. Nance with the Frank W. Hale Jr. Distinguished Service Award, an honor given to individuals who have, quote, contributed substantially to diversity and inclusive excellence in higher education. From 2020 until her recent retirement in May of or June or whenever it was, 2024, you can hardly tell because she's always on campus. Dr. Nance served as the university's inaugural Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. In this role, she supported Villanova's ongoing efforts to create a welcoming and diverse community for students, faculty, administrators, staff, and alumni. She has partnered with academic, administrative, and other units of the university to develop strategies to foster a Villanova community where individual differences are acknowledged, valued, and appreciated. She also held various DEI roles at the university, including inaugural Chief Diversity Officer, Associate Vice Provost of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, founding Assistant Vice President for the Center for Multicultural Affairs, and the founding director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She has touched so many areas of this university, they are too numerous to list. This very celebration and lecture highlighting the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were her brainchild, along with the Freedom School lecture series we enjoy next year, to happen tomorrow. She was also one of the founders of the One Book Villanova program, a campus-wide effort that presented a book worthy of reading, discussion, course adoption, and the stimulation of dialogue among all members of the campus community. Most recently, and for which I am personally grateful, she chaired Equitas, the Presidential Task Force on Race. In the aftermath of the death of George Floyd and at the height of the COVID pandemic, President Donahue charged Dr. Nance and the Equitas Task Force with assessing the racial climate on campus, identifying areas for improvement, and creating a plan for enhancing the cultural competence of all students, staff, and faculty. That work, accomplished by so many campus partners, including myself, yielded significant and substantive change under Dr. Nance's guidance. In his letter to the community announcing Dr. Nance's decision to retire, Father Peter put it best, quote, "Apart from her numerous professional and academic contributions, Dr. Nance will likely be best remembered for her kind and generous demeanor, coupled with a relentless pursuit of equity for all members of the Villanova community. She has been a tireless advocate for our students, faculty, and staff, inspiring countless others across campus to do the same. Villanova was built on the premise of inclusivity, and Dr. Nance has been integral to helping Villanovans remain true to this foundation," end quote. Dr. Nance earned both her undergraduate and master's degrees from Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts, and a PhD from Temple University in Philadelphia. For the past 41 years, she has been married to the kind and patient Dr. Kermit Moore, also an accomplished professor of communication. He retired from Villanova's communication department in 2017 and has been waiting for his wife to finally come home and hang out with him and their adorable grandsons, Asa and Max. When he retired, she told him, actually she lied to him and said, "I'll be right behind you." When Dr. Nance announced the birth of her grandbabies, those of us who know her well knew that we were getting ready to lose her, that we couldn't compete with those boys, which makes tonight even more special. We are grateful that we get to listen once more to the heart and mind of a woman who, like Dr. King, knows how to play the long game. I have had the privilege of working alongside Dr. Nance for the past 28 years. While she is adept at handling crises and putting out fires, she has always focused on building a sustainable and beloved community. She has recognized that our, quote, children of grace and glory, a term she coined to describe our wonderful students who shine bright like the sun in all their glory, but at times need the unmerited favor that grace provides. She has been my cheerleader, my sounding board, a support and a mentor for which I will forever be grateful. She is kind and loving, smart and strategic, and she continues to have important wisdom to share with us at the beginning of this new season of America's history. Let's welcome and listen attentively to Dr. Terry Nance. Now is the time, community over chaos.
My. Now, if I say to you all, God is good, what are you going to say back to me? And all the time? All right. So you get a hint of what this is going to be like tonight. Just letting you know up front. And I know I have my 20 pages here, but I'm going to go off that just for a minute because Ms. Crystal knows this. Now, I want you to know that the Gospel Ensemble is here for a very special reason. Not only do they sing in a way that lifts us up and rejuvenates us, they are also responsible for the history of this celebration at Villanova University. Where's Magan Keita? Magan, I told you I was calling you out. Stand up. So, y'all know Dr. Keita. Y'all know Dr. Keita. So, it was like this. What had happened was Dr. Keita and I went to the Gospel Ensemble sing to celebrate Dr. King. And it was in front of what's not there anymore, Kennedy Hall. And I know you remember this. It was cold, it was dark, and if there were 10 of us there, that was all that there were. That was it. And the Gospel Ensemble sang in that place in such a way that touched our hearts so much. I looked at Dr. Keita and said, this will not happen again. We will have a celebration. And we did. And so if anything, we need to thank the Gospel Ensemble once again, because you are the reason that we celebrate Dr. King on this campus. You are that reason. I also have to say I am so grateful to be invited here. When I got the call from the good Dr. Murray, I thought sure they had made a mistake, and that in fact, what had happened was that they couldn't find anybody, and so they said, I guess she's not doing much because she's retired, so she might just be available. But Dr. Murray's too gracious, and she says that that's not the case. But I am grateful to the Martin Luther King Speakers Committee for selecting me to do this task. I'm grateful for the incredible administrative work of the Peace and Justice Office, especially Katie Lenahan, yay, and Ray, who has been so wonderful in helping me. So, with that, and because this is timed, and I've been told I need to finish this by 8. We're having questions until 8:30, and at 8:30 we eat. We're going to stay on schedule. Are you with me? Yes. All right. A little of this is cranky, but I hope that's okay too. Some of you are saying cranky's good, right? I'm looking at all my friends, they know. Oh, well. All right. Let me begin with a question. Why is it anytime and every time we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King, we hear the same words? I have a dream. Is it because dreams don't really bother anyone? Or is it because we just want to believe that hearing those immortal words will move the soul of the nation and the dream will become reality? You know, what was true about dreams in 1963 when Dr. King delivered the speech is even more true today. Despite a 24-hour news cycle, we know too many Americans avoid information-laden newscasts, preferring instead to get their information from social media influencers or comedy news formats. You can say, it's all right. It is under these conditions that despite any bad news, vague dreams will allow us to hope that utopian resolutions can be found and the uncomfortable realities, especially about race, will fade. There is a difference, however, between our mediated history, what our mediated history allows us to remember, and what Dr. King actually said and did in the cause of social justice. There is a reason for this. And I'm supposed to be holding up a book that is now sitting next to my husband, I think. Nope, here it is. I'm sorry. See how smooth this is? And this book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And can you picture that? Can you picture that? For those of you who have read this book, you know that it was the last book he wrote, and it is probably his most prophetic. And everything that I will be quoting from Dr. King will be coming from this book this evening. So I just need you to understand that the words here he will be using are the words of 1963. So instead of talking about African Americans or black people, he talks about Negroes. And instead of talking about men and women or people, he talks about men. So in staying true to the text, I will be honoring those words. Are we good with that? All right, just wanted to be clear. All right, so let's get back in the flow of this. So in his book, Dr. King explains, overwhelmingly, America is still struggling with irresolutions and contradictions. Now, he said that in 1968. I'm sorry, yeah, 1968. Irresolution and contradictions. It has been sincere, even ardent, at times, in welcoming some change, but too quickly, apathy and disinterest rise to the surface when the next logical steps are to be taken. This limited degree of concern is a reflection of an inner conflict which measures cautiously the impact of any change on the status quo. In other words, Dr. King is suggesting that many Americans, many majority Americans, were asking themselves, how will embracing racial justice change my life? How will working for equality affect me? Well, dreams resolve fear and allow what is comfortable for the majority to persist, especially at the cost to those who are uncomfortable and in the minority. But is that right? Is the moral arc of the universe long, as Dr. King suggests? And does it bend toward justice? As we celebrate this Martin Luther King Day, let us not dream just to alleviate fear or allow our national malaise concerning injustice in the status quo to remain unaddressed. Rather, let's think along with Dr. King about how to transform the vagaries of national conversations about race into community-building opportunities to promote equality and justice. Now is the time to really see who our neighbor is and ask, will it be community or chaos? For those of you who need to write a paper about the speech, I know you really wanted to come and see me. I will tell you from the beginning that there are 3 parts. Part 1, in cranky candor. I will tell you why the dream speech isn't. It's really about a bad check. Part 2, let's take a quick hard look at the current state of the Black America and ask ourselves, what if Dr. Martin Luther King were alive today, where would he start? And finally, in part 3, let's talk about the present. What advice would Dr. King give today that will help us think through these big issues? Got it? 3 parts. Part 1. Returning to our opening question, why do we remember this speech as a dream? As Dr. King wrestled with what he wanted to say to the thousands of marchers, as you see, gathered here in Washington, D.C. on that hot summer day in August of 1963 to draw the nation's attention to legal discrimination. Got that? Legal discrimination. Restrictive policies and the soul-crushing poverty impacting Black and poor folk across the country. What was the message he wanted to leave with them? Did Dr. King, a man who at this point had spent years leading marches, going to jail, negotiating, pleading on speakers' platforms around the country for the liberation of his people, only want to leave the nation with a dream? What we are here to celebrate is more than an extraordinary man and his dream. What we celebrate is the idea, and hang with me here, the idea that as a nation, the promise of the United States is real. Life, liberty, The pursuit of happiness knows no race, no gender, no sexual orientation, no political party, no socioeconomic status. We celebrate that as Americans, we can work to be better people who can transcend the flaws of the past and create a future for all of us. And it is in that context that we celebrate the man who made us believe it again. I will begin with the title. There's actually another slide after that. Yeah, we will begin with the title. And technically, there was no title. As you can see here from the program, if you have to really squint, do you see what the title of his speech was? Remarks. Perhaps the part of the speech most stirring and easy to remember was the portion about the dream. On close analysis, we have to ask ourselves, was that really the best title? Let's start with a few facts. Right from the beginning, we know that there are 1,662 words in the speech. In the section of the speech that frequently gets played every Martin Luther King Day on television, there are 262 words. Got that? 262 words. Now, those of you who are math majors and quick, like my husband over there, he will tell you that that's about 16% of the speech. So what's going on in the other 84% of the speech? Well, to better understand that portion of the speech, we need to know a bit of context. Let's go back. April 1963, Dr. King's organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, launched a human rights campaign in Birmingham, Alabama, to draw attention to the city's system of racial segregation. The campaign did not begin well. There was hostility from the white community and indifference and fatigue from the black community. Dr. King got arrested in April 12th and thrown in solitary confinement. Subsequently, in May, Dr. King reluctantly agreed to the children's campaign. Children stopped out of school, marched, were arrested, and completely filled Birmingham jails. The Commissioner of Public Safety, those of you who have a few miles on the odometer, tribute to, was particularly hostile to demonstrators and decided to use high-powered hoses to disband the marches. Those horrifying and violent images broadcast across the country increased national calls for action. Those are children, remember. President John Kennedy, in response to the negative media, proposed a civil rights bill on June 11th. Though agreements were tentatively reached with the city of Birmingham, tensions remained high. And let me say parenthetically, a month after the march, a bomb was placed in the 16th Street Baptist Church. It went off, killing 4 little black girls getting ready to go to Sunday school. The summer of 1963 was a time of racial unrest. And because of increased media focus and attention, it was a time for generating new awarenesses and alliances. Organizers for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms wanted to make more transparent a connection between economic justice and, between economic issues and racial justice. A. Philip Randolph from the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and president of the Negro American Labor Council called Dr. King in March of '63 and said his organization was planning to do this march for black job rights. By May, there was support for the march from many different civil rights organizations. Dr. King's SCLC, the Congress on Racial Equality, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and by that point, civil rights leaders notified the White House that there was going to be a march on August 28th, 1963. And they listed goals, and there were very specific goals. No, whoops, back. As you can see, you probably can't see them very well, but that was a flyer from the March on Washington. Those 6 goals were a comprehensive civil rights bill, of protection to the right to vote, mechanisms for seeking redress for violations of constitutional rights. Listen to this one, desegregation of all public schools in 1963. What do you know happened in 1954? Brown versus Board of Education. What do you also know? That instead of giving a specific timetable, what were they told to do? All deliberate speed. So it wasn't very speedy if by 1963 we're still asking for desegregation of the schools. And I've got more to say on that later. Massive federal works program to train unemployed workers, and 6, a Federal Fair Employment Practices Act. As word about the march spread, more organizations joined the effort. The NAACP, the National Urban League, the National Catholic Conference for Interracial Justice, the National Council of Churches of Christ in America, the United Auto Workers, and many more. In short, the March on Washington was a march for justice and access to an economic stability that would afford Black folk secure and comfortable lives. With this context, let's now turn our attention to the speech itself. Dr. King knew he was on a long list of speakers and that he would not have much time to make his remarks. He also knew that the purpose of the march was to focus on jobs and economic security. Now, as a long-time speech teacher, and I know we have some excellent speech teachers in the house tonight, the common advice we give to speakers is figure out what you want to say and then make it fit to the audience you're addressing, right? For Dr. King, the purpose was clear. The audience was complicated. Let me tell you why. While Dr. King knew he had 250,000 people immediately in front of him, he also knew he had millions more at home watching on television. So the question becomes for the speaker, what can I achieve here? What will satisfy my immediate audience and still motivate the television audience? Well, in a persuasive speech, basically you want to do 5 things. Anybody here had public speaking? I should ask you, and we'll do, but I'll tell you. Number 1, you want to attract attention to your topic. Second, you want to illustrate to the audience that the problem exists and that basically they need to care about it. 2, you want to illustrate how to solve the problem. Now, that was 3. Now 4, you want to visualize the solution. And 5, you want to leave them with some concrete steps toward action. Well, taking advantage of the 100th anniversary of the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, King reminds the audience of what a government can do to right the wrongs of history and suggests that it is this belief in those positive actions that brought the marchers to the nation's capital. With the audience attention captured, King then turns to the purpose of his speech with these words. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. And so we have come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. For those of you who know the speech, you know that this passage is a lot longer, because in it, Dr. King lays out clearly the problems for Black people in America. It becomes important to note that he is not simply talking about bad attitudes or hateful language. He is talking about manacles of segregation, chains of discrimination. In other words, he is saying that there are laws and structures that need to be changed. And that's why the marchers have come to the nation's capital, the seat of government where that kind of change can take place. He continues, in a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise to all men, yes, Black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, Americans have given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has been marked insufficient funds. Now, in this key passage of the speech, Dr. King introduces the metaphor of a check, and not just any check, a bad check. If you recall, the purpose of the march was to connect economic justice and civil rights. Here's where Dr. King tries to address the purpose of the march in a way that will address both his immediate audience and his television audience. Now, his immediate audience would resonate with the notion of a bank of justice is not bankrupt, while his television audience, which we know now skewed northern, white, and liberal, would resonate with the notion of a check. This is a clear signal to the television audience that the work of civil rights was shifting from the courts to the economic structures of society. Hear Dr. King as he says, "But we refuse to believe that the bank of justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice." Think about the power of those words. The strength of the civil rights movement has always been the reliance on the very words of our nation's founding documents. Let me stop here for a moment. In 2025, these words of the founding document seem not only idealistic, but untrue, like lyrics of a song that have gone out of date. And yet, even in 2025, even when it seems the moral fabric of this country is being shredded with each new political shouting match, with each new challenge to democratic decency, with each new abrogation of long-held human rights, it is imperative that we remember, though presidents may change, senators may come and go, what is invariant are the words that created this country. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Speech after speech after speech, not only Dr. King, but all the great orators of the civil rights movement, including John Lewis, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ralph Abernathy, Bayard Rustin, Kwame Ture, or Ella Baker, talked about those legal and moral grounds on which Black folk were demanding their rights. Their claim was fundamentally that Black people had a right to live free. Right? It wasn't a gift. It wasn't something somebody should choose to give you. It was a right to be free from the deprivation caused by injustice and illegal discrimination and prejudice. The takeaway here is simple. The speech to those gathered for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom was not so much about a dream as it was demanding that the promises of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution be kept. And not just in terms of white people being nicer to Black people, but in terms of changing laws, eliminating barriers, and reforming policies that kept Black folks from accessing the kind of financial stability that would afford them balanced and secure lives. And that's why I don't call this speech the dream speech, but rather the bad check speech. Dr. King was putting America on notice that the civil rights movement recognized the importance of economic stability and intended to work toward those goals. A note about the dream. What many people don't know is that those 262 words were not included in the original manuscript of the dream. The original manuscript that Dr. King brought with him to the speaker's platform that day. And we know this because of Villanova and George Raveling, who was one of King's bodyguards that day, actually got a copy of the speech. How many of you know who actually is in possession of that copy of the speech. It is now the possession of Villanova University. We have loaned it to the Smithsonian, where it is on display at the African American Museum. You should go and see it. So the question is, so where did those words come from? What we do know is that Dr. King had previously given a speech in Detroit, Michigan at Cobo Hall, where he talked about the dream in very much the same words as he talked about the dream in Washington. We also know that Dr. King was influenced by previous speakers of the day, which many of whom surrounded him as he spoke. One of the speakers was famed gospel singer Mahalia Jackson. And at one point, in the speech, after Dr. King had meticulously laid out his economic argument, called to him, "Martin, tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream." He delivered the economic speech, and now he was ready to preach the audience toward visualization and action. It was not enough for the audience to be intellectually moved. Purposeful steps needed to be taken. Dr. King knew that there was great work to be done, and a march was just a brief interlude in the process. You see, we may dream about justice. Achieving justice takes more, and the only way to surmount the chaos of discrimination and injustice was to work together in community. As I think about today, I disagree a bit with newscasters and pundits who focus on the King holiday as a day for simply doing service. The real purpose of Martin Luther King Day celebrations must move beyond simply painting walls or tutoring or cleaning up alleys. Rather, it must be to think critically about why it is you're doing the service in the first place, what is needed, and how the task on which you worked can be taken care of more permanently. It is in this way that service is about making the lives of people in pain better. That's why we do it. As I reflect on both my personal and professional life, I've come to realize that you don't choose your cause as much as your cause chooses you. Allow me 2 examples. In 1955, when Martin King was just 27 years old, fresh from his Boston University PhD program, returned to Alabama to begin his ministry in Montgomery. Little did he know he would soon be spearheading epic change in his community, a bus boycott that would end with a Supreme Court ruling declaring bus segregation unconstitutional. Let me tell you about it. Personal reflections from King's friends and associates tell us that all he did was offer the basement of his Dexter Avenue church as a place for boycott organizers to meet. However, as the meeting went on, this is the problem going to meetings. However, as the meeting went on, because he was new in the community, had neither friends nor opposition, the Montgomery Improvement Association leaders thought he would be best to lead the boycott, putting a primary focus on the boycott and not an individual. An opportunity chose him, and Martin King, an unknown young person, changed history. The second example, well, it's me. I have to tell you, I did not come to Villanova to change this institution. I just wanted to teach and advocate on behalf of my students. But as I think about it right there, all I did was say, okay, I'll be a moderator of an organization. I offered a little and was presented with an opportunity to do a lot. My challenge to you today, think about the chaotic opportunities available to you to change history. Imagine if Dr. King were your classmate, your friend. What opportunities might change you and trigger your willingness to serve? You know, let's look at 4 areas: health, wealth, education, and justice. Let's turn first to health. And as I look at my good friend, Dr. Betty Keach, Despite high instances in the Black community of diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and stroke, still, there's good news. The life expectancy in the Black community has increased. In 1968, when Dr. King died, the life expectancy was 64 years old. Today, it is 72.8. I should be dead, but it's 72.8 years old. And well, that was the good news. Unfortunately, it's still not as high as it could be. But what is a real concern for us is infant mortality. In 1968, one of the things we know is that Black infants were 1.9 times as likely to die as white infants. Today, that number is 2.4 times as likely as a white infant to die. It's 2025, folks. You know what else we know about this? Is that it goes across income groups. Certainly, some of you may be moved to have this cause choose you. But you know what? We also know that it is particularly a problem in high poverty areas. And Dr. King would certainly want to know that in the United States today, while the overall poverty rate is 11.1%, for Black folk, it is 17.9%. This is also true, that African Americans account for, look at that number, 37% of the people experiencing homelessness. Do you know what percent African Americans are of the overall population? Some of you probably know it's 13.7%. Clearly, this number far outstrips the actual number of people in the population. We can go further and say African Americans account for more than 50% of the families who are experiencing homelessness. These numbers are troubling. These numbers may call to some of you. These may be your opportunity to change. Let's now talk about wealth. Now, wealth, I'm going to talk about income and net worth. Now, income is your paycheck. You know, that's what you get. Yeah, either at the end of the week, bi-weekly, or monthly. That's what you basically live on. And there is good news here. As you can see from this chart from the Pew Center, a third of Black households are earning $75,000 or more. And actually, the median income for Black households is about $50,000. Now, that may be kind of good news, but one of the things that we also know is that there is still a gender and racial wage gap. Now, while I would love to talk about gender, let's focus on Black workers. And I want you to look at the top part of that. This is even among college graduates. And seniors, think about this, that those seniors of you who are Black are probably going to earn $3.24 less than your white colleagues. Dr. King would, I think, find this interesting and want to know more about why. Now, I want you to keep that in mind as we now talk about wealth. Now, wealth is the accumulation of what you have, right? It's not just your income, it's not your salary, but it's also going to be what you own. What you own, and less, of course, anything that you own, like owe in terms of like college loans or mortgages. And again, let's start with some good news. Generally, we know that across all racial and ethnic groups that there was an increase. However, we know, and even for Black folk, there was an increase from 27.9 to 44.8, but what we know is that Black folks still continue to lag behind the other groups. So this becomes a point of concern, especially as I talk about some other things later on. But in particular, here's a way of thinking about this. For every $100 in wealth, not salary, in wealth that a white family has, a Black family has $15. When we talk about that, we're talking about the cushion, the security blanket that families have. What happens if someone has an illness? What happens if someone becomes unemployed? All of this is the reason why we need those financial cushions and why we might be seeing those numbers that we saw in homelessness and in poverty. These are the kinds of questions, these are the kinds of issues that could move you, hopefully in this audience, toward the kind of action that Dr. King took. Let's now talk about education. And the good news is that their high school completion rates are good. Now, if this were another speech, I'd talk about what's actually going on in the high schools. But again, I see some friends from education. We aren't going to go there because that's another whole speech. But who goes to school with whom? Dr. Gary Orfield did an incredible study in conjunction with the celebration of the 70th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Remember, I told you I'd come back to this. Look what he found. Intensely segregated schools by race and class is where we find a substantial portion of students of color. Look at that number. In 2021, 1/3 of all black students in this country attend doubly segregated schools. And if we look at, and then put that with this next piece of information from Ed Trust, where we see that those schools are also not receiving funding from either state or local governments, or being underfunded by state and local governments to the tune of sometimes $2,700 per student. And if you multiply that in a district of 5,000 students, that means that that district is $13.5 million down. And if you think about that, underfunded schools undereducate students. Is this a cause that might stimulate your thoughts of getting involved? I hope so. There's good news in terms of college education. We know that fully 1/4 of all US black folk have a bachelor's degree or higher, so that's good news. But then we need to ask at what cost? One of the things that we know is that black adults are more likely than any other ethnic group to carry student loan debt, and that student loan debt is at all levels of educational attainment. Let's go even further. This I found to be particularly fascinating. Monthly federal student loan payments. If you look here, black folk are paying $70, $80, $90 more than other racial groups. If this intrigues you, find out more. This is a problem. Of why this is happening, of how this is happening, and what can be done about it. Finally, let's move on to justice. I'm going to do this very quickly because I feel not only questions coming on, I also am hungry. So as we keep moving on to justice, one of the things we know is that the United States incarcerates more of its citizens than anybody else. Did y'all know that? Yeah, okay. You know, my generation, I'm a baby boomer. We totally messed this up. I was going to say something else. We totally messed this up. You guys have to fix it. You got to fix this. All right. And we know that African Americans have an outsized portion in that. Now, we want to ask why. Take a look at this. One of the things we find is that black people are twice as likely than anybody else to be stopped or arrested at a traffic stop. And couple that with this, is that black people experience police misconduct 6 times more than white folks. Criminal justice system needs some work. If this is your area, if this is your passion, this should be a cause that will stimulate you. So what we're going to do now is move on, because we go through these numbers not simply to highlight the bad news, but as you listen to these data, what I hope you will see is that progress has been made, but not enough. And as we move into the third part of this presentation, you with me so far? We did the part 1, the cranky candor, right? Then we did the hard look at the data, and now we're on part 3. I hope this paper is getting clearer for you. It is important to return to our opening observation when Dr. King told us that while America is ready for some change, basically, it wants to maintain the status quo. So let's think about all of the facts we just heard and ask why. If we believe that all human beings are born with the same basic qualities, then why is it black babies are more likely to die than white babies? Why is the life expectancy of black folks 5 years less than white folks? Why is the number of African Americans experiencing homelessness so disproportionate to the number of African Americans in the general population? Why is there a racial wage gap? Why are the schools to which African Americans send their children most likely to be underfunded? Dr. King, way back in 1968, gives us some insight. He wrote, "Loose and easy language about equality, resonant resolutions about brotherhood fall pleasantly on the ear. But for the Negro, there is a credibility gap he cannot overlook. He remembers that with each modest advance, the white population promptly raises the argument that the Negro has come far enough. Each step forward accents an ever-present tendency to backlash. And that takes us to today. Remember, each step forward accents an ever-present tendency to backlash. The modest gains made in desegregating higher education in the professional workplace have been slowed with the ending of affirmative action. African Americans are still woefully underrepresented in medical, legal, educational, and technical professions. The numbers are there, they don't lie. Educational equity programs designed to offset the debilitating effects of the pervasive and inadequate school funding that I showed you are ending or being restructured. Highly trained and qualified professionals who dedicated their lives and careers to helping students from under-resourced communities and schools achieve their educational goals are being demonized and dismissed or reassigned to other jobs. Perhaps most discouraging is the growing lack of empathy and understanding for difference in life experiences, especially those marked by race, gender, sexual orientation, and national origin. What Dr. King might see as his opportunity to serve is to figure out how, in 2025, Americans can begin to see each other as neighbor. To me, before we can begin to tackle the chaos related to such issues as generational poverty, wealth disparity, failed public educational system, we must first come to see the people, the individuals who live in disillusionment, hurt, despair. As I listen to the public figures arguing their various positions, it seems many are more compelled to win nebulous arguments and score points against political foes than to think creatively about the big problems facing all of us. Dr. King's vision here is prophetic as he writes in 1968, there is a need for a radical restructuring of the architecture of American society. For its very survival, America must re-examine old presuppositions and release itself from many things that for centuries have been held sacred. For the evils of racism, poverty, and militarism to die, a new set of values must be born. Let us be those creative dissenters who call upon our beloved nation, Dr. King wrote, to a higher destiny, to a new plateau of compassion, to a more noble expression of humanness. And so I ask you, here's the question. What will be your noble expression of humanness? Will it be taking your place as leaders in government, business, or social services? Oops. and finding ways to address the triple plagues of hunger, homelessness, and poverty? Will it be to work directly or indirectly to assure all children, regardless of zip code, receive the very best education and educational assets possible? Will it be for some of you to take on the criminal justice system and work to end injustice there? Will it be, as parents, citizens, and educators, confirm that all students from kindergarten through college cannot learn if they are not healthy? This includes both their physical and mental health, and that part of getting a good education in this country means all students have access to the right professionals and resources they need. As I move toward my conclusion, the big point here is that we celebrate King and his legacy by thinking critically about our current situations and finding compassionate answers that provide meaningful and structural solutions. Dr. King did not give us an ephemeral dream by which to remember him. Rather, he called on us to look past name-calling, shallow, spiteful arguments on popular media, and look instead to our neighbor who needs our help. In doing such work, I guarantee you, you will not always feel successful. Dr. King counseled us by saying, we must not permit adverse winds to overwhelm us as we journey across life's mighty Atlantic. We must be sustained by our engines of courage. Hear me when I say that? Sustained by our engines of courage in spite of the winds. So as I think about this presentation, if you remember nothing else, remember this. Martin Luther King Jr. was an American visionary who had boundless hope and belief in the promise of this nation. Despite his setbacks, despite his disappointments, he believed that the people of America had the moral courage and determination to make things better for each other. What makes Dr. Martin Luther King so special to us today is that he had the audacity to demand that as a nation we do better, not only in changing laws or writing good policy, but in asking us, and listen to this, asking us to love one another. What finally makes sense to me after all these years of studying Dr. King is that none of the changes he proposed then, or that we talk about now, will happen if we don't begin by caring for each other. And Dr. King knew that it was not just caring alone, because he once said, read along with me, power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Love, power, justice, love. Understanding these connections and being willing to accept the responsibilities of the cause that chooses you is truly living the real dream Dr. King talked about so long ago. My final words to you today: dream the impossible, my friends, and use power to love to make it probable. I'm done. Thank you. I am humbled. I am humbled. I am humbled. See, this is what you get when you get cranky and retire. Oh, you guys are going to miss some good questions and answers because I'm retired and I can tell the truth. And I worked for Father Peter. Questions? I'm going to sit down too. Hi.
Hi. It is? Okay. Hi, my name is Trisha Colapri. I'm a senior peace and justice major. So
Your first name again?
Sorry?
Your first name?
Trisha?
Patricia. Thank you.
I just wanted to say first, thank you so much. That was a beautiful and very powerful speech. So my question is, in the past couple days, myself and a lot of my friends have been feeling a little bit hopeless, as it seems like every step in the right direction that has been taken, and especially in our past 4 years here at college, it seems is being dismantled with a sign of an executive order. Do you have any advice for us, especially as we start to enter the job market, about how to best, trying to figure out how to word this, how to keep going when it feels like everything that is being done right is being undone as soon as we can get it done?
Patricia, you have asked the question that I am sure is on the mind. Whoa. Should I turn mine off? I could talk. Can you hear me? Yeah. You know what I teach. Anyway, Patricia asked, did everybody hear Patricia's question? Yes. Is that a question that you're all thinking about? Yes. All right, one of the things I would say is stop watching the news. But I say that only half facetiously. I have a wonderful friend, some of you know him, his name is Dr. Maurice Hale. And one of the things he does is he watches CNN, he watches C-SPAN continuously. The man is going crazy. Quite frankly, one of the things that you have to do, and what my speech was about, is you need to focus on what you have control over right now. And right now, you have a span of control over what has called you for right now, what has called you. Now, I'm not saying ignore what's going on, because there are things that you still can do. And those are the kinds of things, quite frankly, and I hate to pull the old lady card, but this is not the first, he's the worst. Come on, let's hire. It's not been this bad before. It has not been to this level. But we have seen this before. And I would say that I have written more than my share of letters. I have gone to Washington many times, and it was always in a process. Right? And that's one of the things that I would hope, that I know it's tough to do, but you need to be patient. Now, while you're being patient, that means you need to be active too. And the more active you are, the more you will see that there are ways in which you can begin to combat some of what's going on. Because you know what? Time is marching on. And this is 2024. 2028 is coming. And the midterm elections are coming even before that. Isn't that right, Professor Berg? Coming soon, right? And are there areas in which you could be working? Are there areas for potential people who can offset some of the things that are happening? Did you hear that? Absolutely. One of the things that you can never believe is that there's nothing for you to do. Because as soon as you believe that, then justice is done. You have got to believe that you can do something. Now, you know what? People will call you idealistic. People will say you're wasting your time. People will say, why in heaven's name are you doing that? And you just keep working. You just keep your eye on what you know is right. And if you think about it, we think about Dr. King now, and we think he snapped his fingers and that there was civil rights. Take a history course, enroll in African American rhetoric, and you will see that that was a long time coming. And that Dr. King, when he died in 1968, things were not looking good. Because, you know why? Because he had come out against the Vietnam War, which people kept saying to him, Martin, pay attention to civil rights. Don't be concerned with that war stuff. And he said, how can I honestly fight for civil rights and not be against war? So that if we follow his lead, then you do what you have to do to keep moving on. And you get practical, right? Where you need to get practical to make the kinds of changes that will be happening. And seriously, stay away from too much news. It will be pressing. Just shout it out. Well, you hope.
Hi, Dr. Nance. My name is AK. I'm a senior criminology and poli-sci double
Okay, so
major.
you're going to be changing that criminal justice system.
Yeah, I'm trying. So you talked about how there was a big push to maintain the status quo, and that any real effective change doesn't really come without a lot of force and a lot of pressure being applied. And so what I'm noticing now, kind of to Trish's point, is that there's been a lot of apathy, not only in our community, but just throughout the country as a whole, because so many people do feel hopeless. So the question I guess I would have is, how do you combat that apathy that seems to be growing? Because it almost seems like apathy is something that's harder to fight against and struggle against than straight up hostility. So that would be my question.
I'm sorry. I missed your first name again?
AK?
AK? You know what I'm going to say to you? How do you fight apathy? And I'm like, seriously, how do you fight apathy?
I think like the main thing when it comes to fighting apathy is just making sure that people don't forget and not caring necessarily what either your peers or the institution that you're a part of has to say about you. I think that especially in the last year and a half, we've seen that there have been a lot of students who've taken steps forward in trying to combat apathy on our campuses. And I think that there have been consequences that have been rolled out against the students. Many would argue unfairly, but I'm not going to argue with that. I'll argue about that. But I think that the main thing to do is making sure that whatever you're passionate about, people don't forget what it is that you're advocating for.
I love that answer. All right, I remember Cornel West stood here, and he answered that question, and I will give you the Cornel West answer. He said, AK, very similar to you, whatever your cause is, let people know that that is your cause, and that when they see you walk through the door, they know that that's your name and that's your cause, and that it's okay. Because remember I said a cause chooses you? Hand to goodness, I truly did not come to Villanova to get involved. My mentors were telling me, look, it's a new day. You've got to publish. You got to write some books. You cannot get involved in student organization. And that gentleman in front of you came to my office and asked me to be moderator of the new Black Cultural Society. I told him no at first. Are you crazy? But what happened was that I got to know students. And then any time, and I'm sure many of the administrators are not here now, thank goodness. Isn't that paucity of administrators here? Yes. One of the things that happened is that every time somebody saw me, I was advocating for somebody. I needed money. I needed some credits. I needed to get people in classes. I became known as a student advocate. And that's okay. And that's okay. Did it get me shut out of some? And AK, here's one of the things you have to understand is that, and Tricia, your advocacy is going to come at a price, right? And that there are going to be people who are going to push against you. And that's where it becomes important to be grounded in what it is that you believe. And I will tell you, and this is going to sound like a commercial, but I honestly, even before Father Peter's inauguration, believed in Veritas, Unitas, and Caritas. And I used that in every argument I ever made and said, how can an institution that claims Veritas, Unitas, and Caritas not want to support all of its students in as fair fashion? Find that hook. Find what it is that you believe that leads you to action. That's called your values. Those are the values that you should use and keep using. Now, I'm also saying, be strategic. You know? And I will tell you, many of my friends will tell you that over the years, there were many black students in particular, and some black faculty, who urged me to move faster, to move more flamboyantly. And I kept saying, it's the long game. It's the long game. So I'm not telling you to play the long game. But if you've got that kind of longevity planned in what you're going to do, then think not only of what you can accomplish today, but think of how what you're going to accomplish today will build tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow until you get where you're going. One of the things people sometimes ask me is they ask me how you're doing, and I say I'm putting one foot in front of the other. How many of you have asked me that and I've given you that answer? Or I'm putting one foot in front of the other. And you know what? The quotation is, you put one foot in front of the other until you reach the top of the mountain. And that's the answer that I would give you. That was far too long an answer. All right.
Hello? Oh, this works. Hi, I'm Kane Chapman. I'm a freshman here, so much different perspective. You mentioned something with there, putting one foot in front of the other. The most important words a man or woman can say is, I can do better, I can take that next step. How can someone, like a freshman, a glorified just out of high school, especially someone who is not a person of color, how can they advocate in a respectful way for good, righteous causes, taking that next step despite any social repercussions?
I'm sorry, Connor?
I'm Kane.
Your first name?
Kane.
Kane. The ears go. That's one of McGon, isn't that right? It's the ears that go. Kane, we talk about being an ally. Where's Dr. Bowen? Dr. Bowen, tell him about being an ally. Oh, I'm sorry, you're on sabbatical. One of the things that we talk about is that this is not just, Dr. King was not just talking to folks of color. He knew that what he was talking to were good people who wanted to work for people. And what I would tell you is that being an ally means being able to honestly hear another person, to see another person's pain. One of the things that we try to accomplish in dialogue, and if you haven't signed up for a dialogue course, you really should, that one of the things that happens in dialogue is that we begin to cultivate empathy. And I think one of the things that's, and especially if you're a freshman, were you in middle school during the pandemic stuff? Just coming out of middle school. That's a terrific time of growth, a terrific time of learning how to form relationships. And the pandemic caused, we know now that caused problems. So figuring out how to reach out to other people, and Villanova has so many great ways for you to really explore that. And I think the dialogue program is a great way to really do that. And the other thing, if I'm not mistaken, and I saw the good Dr. Barry somewhere here, is that the Center for Belonging and Inclusion is another great place. If you haven't gone there, you really need to go there, because every one of the cultural groups would welcome you. And a lot of times at Villanova, we think, I can only go here or I can only go there. And that is not true. In fact, we wanted to go way back. I know for sure that the creation of several of the cultural groups was primarily formed because people of all races signed the doggone petitions in order to get them to be groups. So allyship has a strong history here at Villanova. We can support you in the classroom and out. And I just saw Kathy Burns. I know that in student life there are also areas where empathy can be developed through a whole host of student organizations. Peace and justice. What I would say is do something. You can't do everything, but you can do something. And that's what I would advise. Come on, you got more questions. I could start showing you pictures of my grandchildren. They are so gorgeous. I'm sorry.
No, you're all right. I'd love to see that. Hi, I'm Jack. I'm a freshman political science major. And my question is, so we've mentioned that there's some things that are making us feel hopeless and apathetic right now because I'll phrase this rather explicitly, you don't have to, because of a new administration that has come in that has made some controversial decisions that many of us feel has reversed some necessary progress. And I guess my question to you is, one of the reasons that that administration is now in place is because the opposition to him failed to cultivate an effective message. Dr. King cultivated a powerful and effective message. You just gave a very powerful and effective speech, and I thank you for that. So what's the message we need to send to prevent someone like this from coming into the White House again?
Jack, can we talk for a second? Did you vote? How old are you?
I'm 18, going on 19 in about 2 days.
Did you vote?
I did vote.
Okay.
Yes.
What message would motivate you in when are the midterm elections?
26.
26. What message would motivate you in 2026, a time when most people don't even bother to vote, to go to the polls? What would get you to the polls?
Personally, I think an emphasis on, I don't know, well, this is, in 2026 when we're electing representatives and in some cases senators, I think we need to focus in those elections specifically on what the federal government has the power to do, and local officials need to focus on what local officials have the power to do.
Okay.
And so
what are those issues for you?
Well, for local issues,
Yeah, what's a local issue?
I think racial justice is an issue that is very much well enforced locally.
Okay.
And federally, it's harder to keep your finger on that pulse. And I think federally we need people who are saying, hey, the president and Congress doesn't have the power to say regressive or put in place regressive restrictions on racial progress, because that's just not the president's prerogative.
So what I hear you saying is that you have a concern about race, you have a concern about justice. And are you saying to me then that perhaps if you are a representative of your generation, that perhaps others in your generation are directly concerned about that?
Yes, in
All right.
various
Then
ways.
what I would say, if I were crafting a message then for you and your peers, is that I would be as upfront and as hard-hitting as I could be. Think about the numbers that I showed you. Think about what I just showed you. $100 to $15. Black students, black graduates are paying $70, $80, $90 more in federal loans. There are injustices going on right now. And here's the point. They didn't just happen. It's not just a coincidence. They are the result of years, right, of practices that have victimized people. You've got to be able to say, and what I would agree with you is we needed a campaign that was a little more direct, that said what is wrong, and partially one of the things that is very true, and poor Jack, you're standing for all of this, is I think we're afraid to have the hard interracial conversations. Am I right? We are, and I think that many times we tiptoe around saying direct things to our colleagues who might be of a different racial group, who might be of a different gender group, a different sexual orientation group. Tell me, I got them all. Get them all. Religion, right? We tiptoe around instead of being able to say, my face to your face. You know, I think white folk have a tendency to backlash. Every time I hear reverse discrimination, every time, did you hear this? That there is a call for reparations for people who have been harmed by DEI. What you need to think and call it what it is. Dr. King said in 1968, it's called backlash. And it's called people wanting to maintain the status quo. Whether we recognize it or not, there is great comfort in the way things are. Except, of course, if you're one of the people who is in discomfort. And so one of the things that I would ask you to do, Jack, as you're beginning to think about what that campaign appeal should be, I'd also, political science is good. I'll also take a few communication courses. Sorry, Camille. But because I think structuring a message around what is the best strategy for moving forward is going to be the way that we move forward. And that has to be direct, and it has to be person to person. And you know what? I'd have to say it has to be pain to pain. Because that's what people are feeling right now. I think across the board, people are feeling pain. 2 more minutes and it's food time.
Hi, my name is Shayna. I'm a sophomore Peace and Justice and Sociology major. Hold it closer. Okay. So going off of the question 2 times ago, you said that there are all these organizations and the dialogue classes and everything that are amazing, especially for white students to take. I've noticed on campus there's so much segregation in clubs, majors, and students are not actively seeking these courses because a lot of white students simply don't care or haven't even had the experience of hearing from people of color and different experiences. So I was curious, do you think there's an institutional obligation to require students to get these experiences? And is there ways, sorry if I put you on the spot, but, and then if not, then how can white students who want their peers to care about these issues go take these classes or get involved with these organizations and also desegregate clubs without a simulation?
Okay. Dr. Bowen, that wonderful woman over there, Dr. Abujaderi, and I worked on a course for a very long time. And it was called Race, Justice, and Dialogue, and it was a course that we had hoped would be rolled out for the entire university. And in the course, guess what we were going to do? Talk about race. Anybody here taken any of the race and justice courses? Thank you. And as you know, we haven't given up. I'm retired. Keep forgetting that. It's a long process. Remember I told you the long game? So that the course is done. It is it has modules developed. It has lessons developed. It's in the can, so to speak. And there are sections being offered. And what I would say is that everybody who's taken a course, talk to somebody else. Talk them into the course. That's right, each one, reach one, right? And it's in that way, because one of the things that I think is that we know we have been asked to make dialogue mandatory. Dialogue wouldn't work if it's mandatory because it's too personal. This course is available. We're working hard on it. We would like to make it rolled out more. Long game, long game. I think bit by bit we're going to make more progress. But Shayna, one of the things I would say is, in terms of desegregating organizations, start an organization that's specifically about desegregation. An interracial club that is specifically talking about interracial relationships. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, have you ever gone to what is it called now? Black Student Union. Have you ever gone to a BSU meeting? Go. You go to a Samosa meeting. Go. Right. Every one of those organizations has in its bylaws that it is open to everyone. And I'm sure going to the Center for Belonging and Inclusion is another way of promoting that kind of togetherness. But you know what? It's going to be hard. People are going to look at you like you're out of your mind. And they're going to say, who are you and why are you here? But you have to have your eye on the prize. You have to know what it is that you want to accomplish. And as a sophomore, you've got time. Go with a friend. Go with a friend. And maybe if it's uncomfortable to go to a Black Student Union meeting, go to a Black Student Union event. Though they are desperate for people to come and talk to somebody. Every organization is desperate for people to come. Go. Bring somebody with you. Better yet, organize your floor. Take the whole floor. In other words, what I'm saying, and it's a good way to probably end these questions, is that we can't look out there for what needs to be done next. You have to look in here. What's right in your heart to do? What do you feel comfortable? It's not even what you feel comfortable doing. Nah, because I'm going to tell you, I was uncomfortable most of the time I was on this campus. And I'm sure many people would look at me and go, you were uncomfortable? Heavens, yes. I'd sit in rooms going, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. Those of you might remember that from a long time ago. But yeah, I was uncomfortable. But you know what? I also knew why I was there. And I also had a long game. And I knew I had a plan. And as I'm looking around, some of you are the products of that plan. And you're doing exactly what I had hoped you would be doing. And so I would say that each of you can do that as well. Each of you, you have a plan. You're here to get an education. And I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do with that education? How are you going to make a difference? What cause is calling you right now? What cause says that you and only you have an insight that can be offered here that will make a difference? Dr. King just said, come and use the basement of my church. That's all he did. That's what I would that's what I would say to you. Put yourself in the way of a cause, and a cause will find you, and make that your life. I'm done. Thank you.
Dr. Nance, a great speaker is someone who tells us things we didn't know. All right, I'll get up here. I'm short. A great speaker is someone who tells us things we did not know and helps us imagine who we could be. A great preacher reminds us of what we already know and of who we are. And you are a great speaker and a great preacher, and I thank you so very much tonight.